All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Topics with Mr. Javadi. Today we have a very special guest from Germany, and this is Victor Grossman. And I'm sure some of you have heard of his name. In fact, probably many of you. He does do guest speaking, and he sort of goes around various countries and gives talks about his experience in East Germany, and we'll get into all of that. I am just more than blessed to have him with me today. You may be wondering why I'm doing this because, as many of you know, I am actually I lean more right. I'm an independent voter, and I'm talking to a person who's known to be a leftist. Well, to me, that's what it's all about. It's all about communication. And I taught speech and debate in English for a long time. And so for me, it is about communication. So, but I find him very authentic, and I'm sure that you will as well. So, Mr. Grossman, welcome to the program.
Thank you, thank you. Glad to talk to your listeners and friends.
Well, first of all, I just want to ask you to introduce yourself a little bit. Give us a little bit of a biography, if you will.
Well, it's hard to give it a little, but I grew up in New York. I was born in 1928, so I don't do so much traveling around anymore at my age. However, I grew up in New York and in the end of the Depression, and New York was a very leftist center. And
Right.
I was what you call a red diaper baby. My
Yeah.
parents were leftists, and I
Yeah.
was too from the start, really from the start, and stayed that way. Even in high school, I got into left-wing circles, and and I changed high school a lot, but then I landed in Harvard, and got into very left-wing circles, communist circles, in fact, a club, and somehow was stubborn enough not to shed them when things got rough. I was just too young to get drafted for World War II, just a few months too young. But they caught up with me during the Korean War, and I got drafted. And the problem for me was then, when you were drafted, you had to sign and that was in 1950, that you had never been in any leftist organizations. Well, I had been in a dozen of them. Should I sign? If you had been, you were by law compelled to register at a police station as a foreign agent. And
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't register, you could be sentenced up to $10,000 and 5 years in prison for every day you didn't register. In other words, a week meant 35 years. Well, should I sign this thing when I got drafted or shouldn't I? If I signed it, I was liable to get put in prison because that law was already 6 months old. If I did sign, I would be that would be illegal too. I didn't know what to do, but I had to hurry and decide. So I signed, and I was lucky I wasn't sent to Korea into the war. I was sent to West Germany and hoped that I'd get through 2 years without anybody checking on me. But they did check, and they sent me a letter saying, because I had been in one, two, three, four, five, six, seven organizations on that list, I should report to the military judge the next Monday. Well, I panicked. I didn't want to spend 5 years in prison because that's what it meant then for having lied it meant 5 years, up to 5 years. So I decided to take off and desert, and that's what I did. I was in West Germany in Bavaria. I went to Austria, where there was a dividing line between the Russian zone or the Soviet zone and the American zone at the Danube River at the city of Linz. So I went there by train, and early in the morning, on a Sunday morning when nobody was around, I swam across the Danube and looked to find the Soviet headquarters to report to. I couldn't find them. There was nobody there. It was a Sunday morning. Everybody was sleeping, I guess. But I looked a mess with no shoes. I dropped them in the river, and no a jacket and a torn shirt and a mess. And the Austrian cops picked me up, and they took me to the Soviets, who then sent me, well, first to 2 weeks in a prison to decide what to do with me, and then sent me up north to East Germany. It was called the German Democratic Republic, which is where I
Right.
landed and where I stayed. And that's my story up to there. Or should
Okay.
I add? I should add that when I got there, for the first 2 years, I did various jobs. I learned how to run a lathe machine. I'm very proud I learned that. And I got the chance to go to college all over again, 4 more years in Leipzig, studying journalism, which is what I did. And on the way there, I had met my wonderful, wonderful wife and had my first of my two wonderful sons, did the 4 years, and then moved from Leipzig, that was the second biggest city in East Germany, up to East Berlin, which is where I've been ever since.
So you are still like today, you are in East Berlin?
That's right,
Oh,
except,
okay.
of course, that it's not as divided anymore.
Right, right.
That is,
What
it's not officially divided. There's a certain, you can tell a difference, they say, in talking between an East West Berlin and a West Berliner, but that's gradually decreasing.
Yeah, yeah. Um well, yeah, what was then East Berlin? What was then? But now of course it's a different situation. Um Mr. Grossman, would you touch a little bit on your growing up in New York? How was it? How was school? How were your friends? I mean, what were you doing? Were you going to various debate clubs, or what were you doing?
I, uh, when I was in high school at 13, I joined the Young Communist League, which was
Okay.
very big in those days. It
Mm.
was quite, in fact, quite popular. Not huge, but quite popular at our school, especially Bronx High School of Science. And
Right, right.
I was there for 2 years, and I joined it. Then my mother switched me over to Fieldston School, a very posh school. She got me in free, though. And there they didn't have such an organization, but I still went to meetings of the youth organization. It was then called the American Youth for Democracy, where we did not only, well, we did political things. We passed out leaflets. There was a very good congressman from New York in those days, leftist. He
Mm.
was the only one. His name was Vito Marcantonio, very popular with Italians, but also with Puerto Ricans. And
Yeah, yeah.
we passed out leaflets for him. He later ran for mayor, and uh, and we joined in picketing against Jim Crow, against discrimination against blacks. We took part
Hmm.
in such, and in those days, still we helped the war effort because that was still during the World War II, uh,
Right, right.
which ended while I was at Harvard.
Hmm.
So that I was one of the things we did in the youth organization. We had, I think, every 2 weeks we had a um, square dance meeting, dancing square dances and singing songs of singers later known as Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Paul Robeson, who were very popular at the time. Those were left-wing singers. They're not so
Right, right.
known by the present generation, but uh, they sang wonderful songs, and we tried to learn them and sing them too. And we did the square dancing, which is one of the things I missed most in Germany because they didn't know it, or they only knew it from Western films. Um, but that's one thing I missed. I'm told that it's not being done much now these days either. Square
Yeah,
dance.
well, from what I understand, I think you are probably right. However, it sounds like a wonderful sort of a growing up experience. I mean, you had a
Oh,
lot
I
of,
loved it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sounds very, very varied and diverse and uh, very
Okay, that was
engaging.
more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah,
diverse and very engaging, I would say, from what you're saying.
I didn't
I
get it.
didn't catch that question.
Oh, I was just saying, it sounds like you were very engaged in the education process from what you're saying.
Yes, definitely. And
Yeah,
by the way,
yeah.
we invited those singers up to Harvard, where I was remained politically quite active.
Did you
Also,
really? Yeah.
yes, we are at Harvard. We were very active fighting against discrimination. There was a club there, which it was an off-campus student club off the yard, and
Right.
they didn't let black students in. They had an excuse. Well, we
Hmm.
picketed it there for several weeks until we finally broke through. And we also, in jobs at one of the big department stores in Boston, we broke through there too. And we demonstrated against atomic war.
Oh,
We wanted
fabulous,
to,
fabulous.
we wanted to ban the bomb in those
Yeah,
days already.
yeah. I am
That
a
was
hundred.
1945 to 1949.
I'm 1,000% with you on that one. No war, peace. That's great. That's great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, well, and you talked about it, from there, basically, you end up in East Germany, but in Harvard, let me just back up one more time. So, in Harvard, what degrees did you get?
What degrees did you get in Harvard?
At Harvard, I got a Bachelor of Arts, but basically my main subject was economics with a stress on labor union history, which has
Mhm.
always interested me very much. Especially American labor union history, because it was so very, very dramatic. It's largely unknown today, but one of the most dramatic stories there is of the fight of working people in the United States to make a living, to get down to an 8-hour day, to get jobs for women, for blacks, and to fight for their rights. It ever since the middle of the 1800s, when industry really developed, it's been a terrific and sometimes a very bloody battle, but a very
Yeah, yeah.
interesting story which I've written about in my books.
Yes, yes. No, it sounds, I mean, you seem to me like a very, very smart person because, for one, Harvard is a tough school. And for another, you go there and you get a Bachelor of Arts. That's amazing at that age. And then, of course, we are in East Germany. How did you find East Germany when you arrived there? How did you find
First,
it?
I should mention that the university in Leipzig was then called Karl Marx University. So
Okay.
I'm the only person in the whole world who has a diploma from Harvard and Karl Marx University. And I'll remain that because it no longer it hasn't changed its name. So I'll be the only one in the world.
Well,
Uh,
that is just fantastic. It blows my mind. And tell me about the Karl Marx University. How was it? Was it really a tough school? What did you do
but
there?
I went to a special section. It was the journalism school,
Right.
which was pretty new in those days.
Uh huh.
And I must say that I didn't really learn so much journalism there. It was just getting going. I learned that later on the job. But
Yeah.
what I did learn was they had a mixed bunch of professors and teachers. Some were what are called hardliners, very dogmatic, narrow-minded. Some amazingly the opposite. So what I really learned then was something about German history. I didn't have a clue when I got there, just a very vague clue, and about German literature, which is very,
Oh.
very rich and very interesting, and uh, and new to me because I'd heard of Faust by Goethe. In fact, I'd even read it in school, but didn't understand it. But now I learned something about German literature and history, and I learned now in a big city, well, it was a 500,000. I learned about this East Germany, which was an attempt starting after the Second World War to build up a society which, first of all, completely broke with the Nazi past. Absolutely. And this,
Yeah.
since I was always anti-fascist from the start, but I'm also Jewish, and for both reasons, it was very important to me to break with that Nazi past. And in East Germany, as opposed to West Germany, where they did some talking, but they had the same bunch that in charge, except for the very top level, the same bunch who'd been in charge during Hitler for the most part in all fields. But in the East, they had all taken off, gone west, so that what you had was left-wing people, leftists, some very, very good and important, some dogmatists, some stupid, some careerists, and you had to sort of sort them out. But I guess that's true every place in the world. Um, I took advantage of the very good teachers we had, and uh, and learned about society there. Uh, I don't know if I should go into it, but it was, of course, in many ways very different from the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just fascinating to me. I mean, two very, very good reputation schools, and you got a diploma from both. That's amazing. So you liked, obviously, you liked the intellect, you liked learning and studying. What persuaded you to be more, I guess, left leaning? What persuaded you?
First, I should mention that the first thing that surprised me when I got to that university in Leipzig, at Harvard, up until they changed that later, but at Harvard, men students and women students who were at Radcliffe were strictly uh, divided. You couldn't go to a woman's room, and you go to men's room only between 1 and 7. In Leipzig, you could go whenever you wanted if you could get rid of your roommates. You pay them off to go to the movies if you wanted.
Yeah.
But uh, yeah, it was a complicated thing. People don't realize that East Germany, West Germany too, but East Germany was not uh, a single track place. It was very complicated with all kinds of currents and cross currents. You did have old fascists from the Nazi who still liked the old Nazi days, but they kept their mouths shut because
Yeah.
they knew
Yeah.
that was taboo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kept their mouths shut.
Yeah.
You had, as I said, some dogmatists who didn't like any ideas except the very strict line. You had a censorship of the press.
Mhm.
You couldn't be printed what was off the party line.
Right. Right.
And so that in many ways there was some stuffiness, but at the same time there were some very interesting people and interesting thought and talk. Some of it was centered around that great German writer Bertolt Brecht, who had been in the
Brecht.
United States during the war as a refugee, but came back and set up his theater in East Berlin, which was a magnificent, wonderful. The theater is very nice too, but the plays he produced were absolutely wonderful when I got to Berlin. And very good music, concert music, and opera music. I was more on the classical side in my musical taste, and
Right.
folk songs of Pete Seeger and that. But those two, I wasn't so much on the regular fashions that were going on. In those days, it was Presley, and then came the Stones and so forth. I listened a little, but I wasn't so much into that. But
Right.
but at the university, we had some very interesting fellow students. Some of them went on to play an important role in life, and you had to sort of see how the line is going. In
Hmm.
other words, it was a constant. I had my own thoughts on things I was very critical of, but I was basically supporting the main idea in East Germany. The main idea was, first of all, no Nazis, no fascists, no racists.
Right.
Second, no racism. Every
Right.
every nationality is equal, and and in its own right, good in its own right. This was important to me because I was a foreigner there, but there were foreigners from other countries, Nigerians and so forth. Second of all, economically, the rules were nobody, the rent, for example, had to be very low. It was, I think, almost never more than about 10% of a person's income. And
Right.
and you couldn't be thrown out of your apartment. You couldn't be evicted. That was against the law. So nobody was worried about that. At the beginning, by the way, we lived sublet. Well, my wife and then my wife and son, because there was a big shortage naturally after the war had been a lot. It was wrecked and ruined, and it took them a while to get back on their feet into building lots of new apartments. Later, well, in 1961, so I'd already been there since 52. But that's when we got a very nice apartment, and I've been in it ever since. In the early days, as I say, I paid only 114 Eastmarks. Now I pay almost 700 euros, which
Yeah.
so that it changed immensely. Those days, not only that, but you paid a certain tax every month from your income, except students and pensioners. They were freed from this tax. But everybody who worked, and that meant everybody, had to pay a certain tax, but never more than 10% of their pay. And for that, all medical attention, dental, medical, aids, all of it free. Also, prescribed drugs. When you went to a pharmacy, you didn't need any money. When you went to a doctor, you had an appointment. You waited maybe a couple of hours, but there was no money involved. When you went
Mm.
to the dentist, there was no money involved. This add to that education, free. First, from childcare was free. I think you paid a small fee for milk for the kids. But then it
Yeah.
was free
Yeah.
from baby until graduate school. No money, no tuition, no nothing. And not only that, but students got about 200 marks a month, which was not exorbitant, but it covered your main eating and living expenses because rent was so low, especially for students, and meals, hot meal, lunch meal every day was also very cheap, so that you had basically no financial problem. Students had to go, couldn't spend an awful lot of money, but that's when you came to a problem. They, because of this, and because East Germany was always at a disadvantage economically, geographically, it had almost no natural resources. It was smaller. It was more wrecked. It paid war reparations almost alone. It meant that things were tight in terms of commodities. You didn't have all the commodities which you could get in West Germany, for example, and
Hmm.
which, when TV came along, you saw on TV every evening how they got all kinds of often American cars and American everything from candy to prepared foods to also uh, refrigerators and stoves and dryers and everything, things which were either not available yet, or only very gradually, or uh, still hard to get, and didn't have the good names, the famous names, the logos on them. They were they were often quite good, and they were made to last, not to go break after guarantee time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if
That's
you got a
big.
fridge,
Yeah.
it was almost for life, or
Yeah.
a washing
Yeah.
machine.
Yeah.
With a car, it was very hard to get a new car. You had to wait for years, years and years to get a new car. Some waited 10 years to get a car. The funny thing is, you could get a used car quickly, but it costs more than a new car. and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and to get a new car, you waited years, except once you got the first one, and you couldn't register for a car until you were 18. But once you got a first car, you'd register already for the next one, and your wife would, so that every 3 years you could have a change. But getting that first new car got people angry because, of course, in West Germany you could get one like that, and you could also get one in West Germany, of course, on payments. In East Germany, you had to pay cash down on these things so that they didn't have people with big debts. So that life was different in many ways. Many people were very jealous of the West because they saw all these beautiful goods and commodities, and in terms of fruits, we didn't have too many southern fruits, tropical fruit. We had apples and cherries and peaches and pears in season,
Yeah.
but we didn't have the imported bananas or even oranges, except very rarely. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Lemons, they had more, but those were very rare, and people were angry about that. And so that
Mm.
you have a constant debate among the people, which is better. And
Yeah.
uh, and of course, people didn't always speak completely freely about it because it wasn't the way many people think, that if you said the wrong thing, you were put in prison, or you made a nasty joke about the government, you were put in. That was partly true in those first few years when East Germany was still occupied by the Soviets. But after the mid 50s, or let's say after the late 50s, that began to ease up. And by the late 60s, people talked freely among themselves and in general. Only in meetings, they didn't, meetings or in classes. They tended to stick to the line so that
Right. Right.
nobody would get, because if you were listed as a constant critic and an opposition critic, that could mean that you missed out on various perks. For example, if you were in good standing, you would get the best vacation spots on
Mm-hmm.
the beach on the Baltic Sea.
Right. Right.
If you were not in good standing, you might have to wait another year, or you'd get one maybe in the mountains or on a lake, but not at the beach.
Yeah.
Uh, and there were other perks that you or get promoting. Of course, it was easier to get a promotion if you were true to the party, so that it
Mm-hmm.
was a constant thing. However, I personally felt this was the way of the future.
Mm-hmm.
A civilization or a society where people did not have to worry about paying rent, about paying for the doctor or the dentist, or for their glasses or their hearing aid or their wheelchair. They didn't have to pay for childcare, nothing. They didn't have to pay for summer vacations for the kids, because that was almost nothing. It was
Yeah.
a, in fact, it was a funny device there. A child for a 3-week summer vacation, they had them. Every factory, every enterprise had summer vacations for the children of its employees. Usually 3 weeks. But since almost all women worked, well over 90%, that meant that a child had 2 vacations from father and mother's job. And it cost a child 12 marks, which was nothing. It was like a couple of hamburgers. But you paid for 3 weeks. Um, for two children, you paid not 12, but you paid 18. In other words, reduced.
Mm-hmm.
And a piece. If you had 3 children or more, it was totally free. In
Yeah.
other words, people with more children were helped in that way. They also had longer holidays. Most holidays in those days all holidays were at least 3 weeks. So if you were on shift work, or young, or pregnant, or had a big family, it varied. You could get more, but at least 3 weeks of holidays. And as I say, a lot of people got them through their union at the beach or at the lake or at the mountain. Later, as more and more people did get cars, they started traveling and tenting, going on their own, playing for their own way and going their own to a shore and setting up a tent. And then as they got even more prosperous, There were more and more people going to what was our Caribbean. That was the Black Sea coast in Bulgaria and Romania, and to a certain extent in the Soviet Union. There were resorts which we went to. For example, we were in Bulgaria and at the seaside 3 times, and in Hungary they have a huge lake there. We were there twice, and in the Soviet Union we were there twice too. So that we did some traveling, but only eastward. That's what angered the people too. They couldn't get out to the west. This was a
Right, right.
this was a major problem. After the wall was built in 1961, you couldn't get to the west, and of course, an awful lot of people had relatives in the west, and of
Hmm.
course, an awful lot of people wanted to travel in the west. They wanted
Right.
to eat West Germany and to Italy to see the Leaning Tower or to see the Louvre in Paris or to see the Golden Gate in San Francisco or whatever, and they couldn't. That is, until they were 60 for women and 65 for men. That was the age of retirement. 60 for women, 60. After that, they could travel 1 month a year to anywhere they wanted. But
I see.
young people said, "Gee, I have to wait till I'm 65," and they were
Yeah.
angry about it. So these were some of the problems there were. But I saw that goal of having people not worried about the basics as a very important goal for life, where people were not frightened of having a sudden ailment, maybe even cancer, and losing all their savings, or being thrown out of their apartment because they couldn't pay rent anymore, or even just having the car break down and not being and being living from check to check. This was unknown then. In fact, it meant that people had, not everybody, but a large proportion, had money in their pockets, which they wanted to spend. Some they'd
Yes.
say they wanted to, and they could never catch up with that demand. So there was always a shortage of good things in the shops, which of course angered people because they had the money, but they couldn't. I might tell you the story on this. In the 60s, I guess it was, they were only just beginning to get lots of refrigerators. Yeah, they were
Hmm.
behind. Just getting refrigerators. I told my wife that we ought to want a refrigerator. She said, "What for?" She grew up in a village where they didn't even have any refrigerators. I
Hmm.
told her what for, and we were lucky. We got one of the first ones, but it was a little one. It was about chest high, the
Right,
biggest.
right.
No, now that's what most people got. We were proud because we got one of the first high ones, about your height of a person.
Right, right,
No,
right.
not a deep freeze, but a fridge. And I was proud of that until my mother visited. My mother visited about 5 or 6 times, and she came into the kitchen. She said, "Oh, what a cute little refrigerator." Which took me down a peg with my pride. Uh, but then gradually that improved in the 60s and the 70s. In the 80s, then things got tighter.
Yeah.
And that's when it went downhill.
Well, my wife Aijan, she's from Kyrgyzstan, and Kyrgyzstan was a Soviet republic.
Wait, I didn't
Uh,
hear that.
yeah, my wife Aijan,
He's
she's
from
from
Kyrgyzstan and
Kyrgyzstan.
wife.
She's from
Uh,
Turkestan.
Kyrgyzstan, yeah, and that was a Soviet republic.
Yes.
And so my in-laws, who are both gone now, but my in-laws, my father-in-law, mother-in-law, were both serving in the Red Army. And
Uh-huh.
so I understand a little bit about what you're saying
Yes.
because they had some of the same sentiments. My dad himself escaped Iran when he was maybe about 17 years old, and he went to the Soviet Union because he wanted a better life. And so he lived in the Soviet Union for 7 years. And so dad himself, who by the way also lived in Germany, dad himself told me many times that the Russian people were amazing. He loved the Russian people. He loved the Russian poetry, Russian singing. He loved a lot about Russia. he loved the fact of some of the things you were saying, the, the free education, the free healthcare. He loved some of that stuff. But in the end, he was more right leaning, and that's why he brought us here and started his own business. But my point in all this, right now anyway, is that it seems to me that dialogue can happen because it seems like there's good in both sides.
Uh, yes and no.
Okay.
Uh, Good people in all countries.
Yeah.
Good people, most of whom want to have a happy life, to live well enough to not be frightened of the future, and to get along with people, their neighbors and their friends. And this is true every place, I think, or almost every place.
Right.
However, the problem is, and this was a problem for me always, that there are some people and institutions who are not satisfied with this. They are never satisfied. They want more and more and more. And it
Right.
seems to me that there's a whole group, especially centered in the United States, but also in Germany and in other places, who are becoming billionaires more and more, multimillionaires and then billionaires, and they are never satisfied. They want either, first of all, they want to spread out geographically. And second of all, they want to make more and more and more money. And to do that, you have to beat your rivals so that there's
Right.
constant
Right.
rivalry between them. And not only that, between the countries. And these people, I'm afraid of, frankly. I'm afraid that in Germany, we can see it every day. They really are not afraid of a war. They want to build up more and more and more military. Now they want to reinstitute the draft, which stopped in 2011. Everybody
Yeah.
was happy that it was stopped, almost everybody.
Yeah.
They want to start the draft. They want to spend the money which should be going to improve the schools, which are breaking down, to improve the highways and bridges, which are breaking down, to help seniors. About a third of them are very poor people on, rent, provision, people on after jobs, seniors. Uh,
Right.
Mothers with 2, 3 children who can't go to work are often really down and out trying just to feed their kids. They get certain assistance, and the seniors too, the pensioners do too, but it's being cut now. And education is now in a bad child care. They're having trouble getting enough teachers because they don't get paid well. I fear that ever since Germany was unified, West Germany, which was still at a much higher level than the United States socially in these questions,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
had to keep the relatively high standard because of the East Germans coming in. But now, after 30-odd years, they're beginning to cut more and more and more and spending things which should be going to children, to adults, to everybody, to health care, spending
Mm-hmm.
on armaments, and they and endangering the whole world, because if war breaks out now, and it looks closer than ever in the Ukraine, especially, it could lead easily to somebody dropping, maybe by accident, maybe not by accident, dropping a little atomic bomb and followed by a bigger one, and before
Oh my. Yeah.
the whole world is going to pot. We're all dead and everything's broken. And I'm scared about that, frankly. I think that
Well.
unification of Germany, which is praised so much as a victory of democracy, was basically, of course, it did help a lot of people, and it was nice that they could get together, etc., and travel. But basically, it was a victory for those huge companies, German and some American, who had been thrown out in 1945 from East Germany. I won't name them, but they're pretty famous. They had
Yeah.
been thrown out, and they wanted to grab that back and move on eastward. And that's what they've been doing ever since. And that frightens me.
Well, because I've been thinking about this. I'm still independent, right leaning, but I've been thinking about this. Um, how can the divide be assisted to not exist? I'm thinking of the left and the right hand. Clapping. You can't clap without the left and the right hand together. So it seems to me, and I made a video about this. It's on my channel. It's just a 2-minute video, but it's just clapping. That's it. And it just seems to me that there's got to be some way to dialogue and to bring things together somehow. What do you think would be the solution, especially as you see it in the West with the right and the left divided so much of the time?
Well, first of all, in terms of the world situation, which frightens me,
Yeah.
I most important, and now I think we're probably in agreement on that. Most important is for the countries to sit together diplomatically and to talk things over and to get together enough to end the war in Ukraine, for example. That may be tough with Putin. It may be tough with Trump. Whatever it is, it's necessary to work and to really to work in every way to say stop the fighting and get
That's right.
together.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's happening in Gaza. We'll see. I
We'll
hope so,
see. Yeah,
for the
I
sake of the
agree.
people
I
there.
agree.
It would
I
be
agree.
wonderful if they could get together. But on going a little deeper,
Yeah.
I frankly think that in the United States, it's impossible to really work with people like Musk or the Waltons family or some of the others. I won't know well. Some of the others who own these huge chains who pay people so terribly little, as little as they can, and as soon as they try to unionize, I don't have to name the chains. They crush down to stop it because they're afraid of the workers getting a little bit more money, and they talk about and they're worried about their damned uh, income, which they park in Cayman Islands or someplace. I think
Yeah.
I don't think there's any getting together with them. I think the only thing, frankly, in the long run, in the short run, it means to fight them with every way to unionize and to fight them as they did in the auto industry. And they're beginning, and they're trying to do in some of the other industries, including the food industry. There's fast food and drinks, etc. But it's to fight there. But in the long run, I think the only answer is the one they did try to reach in East Germany, to get rid of these billionaires completely. They're not necessary. It was possible from working people who went to college, of course, to help
Yeah.
them run the industry. And they
Right.
did. They ran it in many ways pretty damned well. And an awful lot of things did work. It took a while. They had many disadvantages, but in the end, we had an economy where nobody was out of work and nobody was lying in the streets. Nobody, not a soul. You never saw a person sleeping in the streets, and you never saw a beggar going through the coaches or to beg. You didn't have it because the money didn't go into those billionaire accounts. They went either into paychecks, or they went into schools, to summer vacations, to medical care, to college education, to and things like that. That's
Yeah.
the only solution for me.
And I mean, I think you make a lot of sense. You really do. I like you personally. I mean, I find what you say very, very sensible. I think it's very logical in lots of ways what you're talking about. And I just hope and pray that people take it in and look at it and see what they can do to improve the situation, because a lot of what you're saying makes sense. I know of a conservative radio host that I listen to, Michael Savage. You may have heard of him, but he doesn't like the homeless problem in Los Angeles, and he thinks that they should build, shelters for them and do something to help them so they have more dignity. and that's at least in my mind, that's a bit more of a socialist idea. Uh, but it just seems to me, and by the way, he's also a centrist. So I just think that there's got to be a way to bridge the gap. I really appreciate the thoughts that you have, and because it's authentic. It's authentic. You don't just talk about it; you've lived it. You've lived it, and that to me is something. It's not You're not just doing it for fame. You have lived it, and that's a beautiful thing, I think, because you practice what you preach. And At the same time, I was just recently reading in the book of Acts in the Bible that the idea of community, the idea of sharing, it was there. I saw it, and it's there. And so some of these things, if we think about it, are actually very, very important. So I think you bring up amazing, amazing points about peace. I totally agree, and I just love what you're
Should,
saying. So yeah,
should I add 2 points?
yeah,
First of all, on religion.
yeah,
Uh, on religion, I've never been religious, I must confess. I'm
right,
a pagan or a heathen. But
right,
I
right,
can see in most of the major religions, which I know anything about,
yeah,
especially the various Christian denominations, the Jewish religion, and the Muslim religion, all
right,
of them base on humanity, on getting along with your neighbors and in helping those who need help. And
right, right,
I think I think this is very important and very good. They didn't always understand this in East Germany. Some people did, some people didn't. But that's important. The other point I want to mention, which you didn't ask about, but people do ask, is about Stasi, about the secret service.
right,
I
right.
should make a comment on that.
Sure,
That that there was a secret service, of course, and it was pretty widespread, checking on people, and and not well loved, though not quite so much feared as people think. Often
right,
people
right,
laughed about these guys because they were
right,
sometimes pretty clumsy. But I think it's important to know that the East Germany was constantly under attack because West Germany always wanted to take over, which it did in the end. Always wanted and was doing everything it could to take over, and they were trying to prevent this, and therefore they were checking every place to see that, and often over diligently, but basically trying to prevent it. And of course, when people talk to me about that, and we talked about it often,
right,
I could remember that in my 20 odd years in the 20 a few years in the USA, I had been checked on constantly by the equivalent of the Stasi, known as the FBI. In fact, I've gotten reports on that, 1,100 pages about me,
wow,
including 7 names of people who reported on me at Harvard. The names, of course, I blacked out. But so that, yeah, I think every country does this. And
right,
and East Germany, which was really threatened and felt itself threatened, was tougher than some of the others. But the FBI was pretty tough too, and I'm afraid that currently they're very, very fearsome, especially if people have a different opinion, say about Gaza,
yeah,
or uh, things have been pretty nasty, and
yeah. No, I
other
agree with you.
subjects,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that worries me too. Although I don't want to mix in American affairs because I live in Berlin.
yeah. Well, I agree with you in the sense that I have to watch what I do before I judge somebody else. I have to watch what I do, and I think there's not enough of that happening. Like before I point the finger, did I, do the right thing? I mean, I have to look at it like that. And in that sense, I totally agree with you because Hemingway talks about it in that one book about the war in Spain. I forget the title, but oh, For Whom the Bell Tolls. he talks about the characters. It was hard to tell the fascist from the non-fascist. That everybody had a degree of fascism in them. And so I think that that is such a true observation, and you're absolutely right. We have to watch what we do as well to set a good example. But Mr. Grossman, I cannot you know even begin to thank you enough.
Best wishes from Berlin, from a
Yeah,
sunny Berlin
no, I,
right
I
now.
cannot thank you enough because I think you're an amazing man. But tell me one more thing. Learning German. Now, that's maybe not related to the topic, but learning German, how did you manage to learn German? I mean, that's amazing. You speak it like your own.
How did you learn German?
When I came to Germany as a soldier, I didn't know German. I knew just a few words, but I didn't know German. But in the 9 months I was in West Germany as a soldier, I worked very hard. I went to a class. I had a little dictionary. I mixed as much as I could with German people so that when I crossed over after about 9 months, I could already speak relatively fluent German, but I'll let you know, German is a very nice language actually, but the
Yeah,
grammar is awful. It's very difficult. And I've been here 70 years. I still haven't managed the grammar completely. I still have an accent, by the way. Then people know immediately that I'm foreign, and mostly they know I'm American.
yeah,
But you can't get over that if you learn a language late. But even with the grammar, I still make mistakes. German spelling is much, much more sensible than American or English spelling. It's pretty well the way you speak it, not like American, but the grammar. Oh God, there's
yeah,
for the word the. There are 7 German words. Just think of it, and you have to get the right one.
yeah.
So, so
Well,
that's just a sample of it.
yeah, it's amazing to me because you've learned it like your own, and so, well, I'm very proud of you. I'm grateful for this visit today. I thank you very very much for your time, and God willing, like you said, inshallah, we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.